Relations between the United States and China have never been so fraught. There's a real possibility of war in the next few years. More and more analysts are talking about it. If we don't have a more positive vision of what U.S.-China relations could look like, it's very possible that we could end up with a worst-case scenario. A basic principle of good strategy is that it's really important to have a vision of the ends that you're trying to achieve. So if we want to get to a place through American policy where the United States and China have reduced the risk of war, America's interests are still protected, and we're having a more constructive relationship, we absolutely need to know what that looks like. So that's what we set out to do in this volume, was to paint a picture, a vision, if you will, of what a better, more constructive relationship between the United States and China might look like in a decade, because we know it's going to take a long time to get there if we ever do. But when we sat down and got together and really thought about it, it is far from impossible that the United States could get to this more constructive place with China over the course of a decade. It's definitely not a guarantee. To be sure, a lot of bad things could happen and we could end up going to war, which would of course be a terrible, terrible outcome. And we can't be complacent. But it's important to recognize that a more positive future, at least a realistic one, again, where American interests are taken into account, is possible, and that this is not incongruous with coexistence with China. The example of the relaxing or the détente in relations that took place between the U.S. and the Soviet Union in the 1970s isn't a perfect case for understanding what might happen in the future between the United States and China. But it does remind us that in these great power relationships, tensions tend to rise and fall over time. They don't always go in the worst case direction. And so by studying what happened in the 1970s, we can begin to imagine what a more stable relationship, what a détente, if you will, between Washington and Beijing might look like if we plan for it. And this way we'll know how to seize the moment when it actually does, hopefully, arise. I think that really the core message for American policymakers, whether they're strategists or whether they're working on China or in related functional areas, is that it is possible that the United States and China could arrive at a point of coexistence where America's vital interests are still protected. Obviously, it's essential that American policymakers fight for American interests, but they need to do this in a way that avoids worst-case outcomes, especially when it comes to this all-important bilateral relationship. And what we demonstrate in this series of papers is that that vision, while far from guaranteed, is possible, and we shouldn't rule it out.